Welcome to the Stop Digging Community Podcast, powered by the nonprofit A² Lamp Groups. I'm Christina, a joyful founding board member since 2014. Your truly unique self-development journey begins today with the first step. Stop digging.
Well, welcome to another episode of Stop Digging Podcast, a community podcast underwritten by A² Lamp Groups, a nonprofit focusing on business education and the community. So I'm excited about our program today. It is so appropriate, and I was so excited to see this lady's profile. So, our theme this year is called Global Works, and we're looking at things that affect the world, either holistically to a human or issue, or, affecting us literally globally. And this topic is something that affects the world globally. Our world is getting smaller and smaller and smaller in many, many ways. And unfortunately, it also comes with some challenges and some problems. So we have the internet, we have technology more than we ever have, ever. And so our expert today will be talking to us about digital addiction. And I am excited about that because whether you're an organization or a person, this is a really hot topic issue. But I have some research I wanted to share with you because I did have some curiosity around the issue itself and what it actually means. We're in a world where buzzwords tend to kind of dominate the day. And so I did a little bit of research and I asked a couple of questions. Number one, what's the difference between a bad habit and an addiction? Number one. And what I found in my research was Berkeley Wellbeing found that habits that no longer serve long-term interests or are detrimental to well-being can be bad habits. And they don't have to necessarily be good or bad. It could just be practices that no longer serve your interest, even if they start out good. However, addiction, and this is defined by the American Society of Addiction Medicine, is defined as a chronic dependency on an external substance, person, or activity that is compulsory, despite undermining, negatively controlling, and harmfully impacting the brain, body, mental, emotional, relational, worship, or work functionality. And I saw a huge distinction there. It's a bad habit that is compulsory to the person who is practicing it, and it makes them reliant on some external thing. When I looked up the word digital age and tried to find its description, I found an article in Forbes magazine in 2022. And, some of us who are my age or older understand that we're actually still in what since the 1950s has been called the information age. But within that information age, there's a little subset called the age of technology. And since technology has become very personalized, they have renamed it as the digital age. There is an organization called EBSCO, which specializes in data processing and statistics for libraries and international research centers. And they have defined it as a time when information and communication is driven by or only facilitated by advanced and connected digital technologies. And all of those words mean that basically the skill of conversing with a human being now goes through digital layers. So if that's resonating with you and you're listening on your personal device right now, don't turn it off yet. Listen to our conversation. But I also want to point out another great thing because our guest and our co-host Chris is going to introduce her, but digital addiction is now a recognized branch of psychology called cyber psychology. And I found that in a white paper from University of Nebraska. And I found that remarkably interesting And definitely this topic is something that I'm excited to explore, not just, for the global applications, but also for our own personal things. And so some of this conversation might be hard to hear for me too. But let's not delay it any longer. If you want to see the research links and check it out yourself, please go to our Stop Digging podcast group in LinkedIn. You never know when one of our guests is going to drop a great nugget in the group, but we also have all of our research there. And with that being said, let's get on with our topic. Chris, Niram, our co-host, our lovely co-host, please introduce our wonderful guest.
Well, we're very excited to have Mary Catherine Liscinski on our program, who is a digital addiction coach. And as you heard from Susan, there's a lot of data behind this becoming a serious problem. And now, as a parent of teenagers, this is one of the things that I go, ooh, I get concerned about. So I'm very excited to hear what Mary Catherine can teach us about this and how to kind of avoid maybe that bad habit transitioning into maybe an addiction. What are some of the signs of it? What are some of the things that we can do to prevent it? So I guess my first question to you is, how would I know if I'm addicted to digital? I just have to take this test real quick. How am I going to be able, if this is a problem that I have?
Well, hello, Chris. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm delighted to be here. So yes, digital addiction is a real thing. I can just jump in and give you some symptoms here, okay? So withdrawal from other people. If you or your teenager or your child, they just go to their room and want to be on their device and not interact with others, that's a sign. Anger, for sure. If you tell your teenager it's time to get off and they throw a giant fit, that shows that they have an attachment level that's too strong. They're too attached to that device. Lower grades due to a lack of ability to focus or trouble focusing at work. We can talk about the ADHD issues there. Poor communication skills. If a young person is spending too much time on a screen, they're literally not having conversations and learning those skills that they need to have. Less eye contact. Again, they're not practicing having conversations with humans. They're not as happy as they used to be. And to me, that's just sad. I know y'all would have seen just this, what I would call zombie face, where it's just a blank look on a young person's face. And to me, we need to see that that's not just the new generation. That is not normal. That's not okay. And someone needs to step in and say, hey, what's going on here? Because that zombie face, as young people, that's the time when we can have, the most vibrancy in our life, the most joy, the most carefree, the fewest responsibilities, and to be just happy, that's our best chance. But when you see them just going around with a blank face, that's not okay. Fewer interests. Again, they will get attached to that screen, whether it's social media or gaming, and lose interest in other activities. And I can explain that in more detail later. Feeling exhausted, but you can't sleep. We can relate to that as adults too. But even when you go to sleep, again, just not being able to fall asleep. Lacking motivation. That's another one that people don't recognize, but it is tied to too much screen use. Or if they seem stressed or depressed with no other apparent clear reason, again, that's a sign of digital addiction.
How young? Because you talked about young children and teenagers. We all know about teenagers. They're just a whole nother ball of wax, so to speak. But how young? How do you know that it's not like a normal 6-year-old tantrum? How do you know that that's the case?
I would say if it is out of characteristic for their normal behavior, that the tantrum when you try to take the screen away or when they ask to have screen time and you say no, I think, they can be too attached, to a lot of different things, and screens can be one. But I think, unfortunately now we see 1-year-olds and 2-year-olds being babysat by a screen, and that is way too young. They do not need any screen time at that age. And so, but when they get used to that, when their little developing brains get used to that level of stimulation, they're not going to handle real life as well by any means.
Yeah, I mean, it's...
Well, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say...
I was thinking... Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking when you were describing that zombie face, I see a lot of grown-ups, workers, because you can't do your job and be successful unless you're connected everywhere. And especially because we came out of COVID with everything being remote. Now, people have, work phone, their regular personal cell phone, their work laptop, you know, they're connected all the time. And I've seen that zombie look on worker faces. And yet, how do you compete? How do you handle an addiction where you have to be using what you're addicted to?
Right. That is difficult for many adults, and as well in the education system, many schools are pushing using screens in school, and that needs to turn. That tide is starting to turn, but that was very much pushed in the past couple of decades. And so I think, for adults, when you see that zombie face, that could also be an indication of their lack of sleep from the night before, right? Because we stay up scrolling on our phones until 2 a.m. and then we get, 3 or 4 hours of sleep before we have to rush into work. And so that could also be a sign, but there's a lot of negative impacts on sleep. And then of course, when a person of any age doesn't get enough sleep, we are grumpy the next day. We're not good workers. We're not good students.
Yeah, I found out that nobody really likes me when I'm grumpy.
Right. Me either. You don't want to be around me if I'm grumpy.
Well, look, there's a lot of pieces to this, because the challenge, of course, is that there's a lot of benefits to technology if used properly.
Right.
And the question is how do you avoid, and like say you're programming your kid's brain early to use it effectively versus as a panacea or a dopamine hit, and these are the challenges. I mean, I'll just talk about myself. I use ChatGPT all the time. Instead of going and searching for things, I'm like, how does that work? And it answers all my questions for me. And then I do a little more research because sometimes it gets it wrong. And I think that's healthy. Now, what happens sometimes is, you go on YouTube and then you get the algorithm caught in and then you get stuck in that doom spiral, which I think is the unhealthy part of it. So I think those are kind of the pieces that I maybe you could parse for us a little bit so we could understand, because that's where you're going to get the argument. But it's so helpful in this way, but it's also so detrimental in another way.
Right. So first of all, it depends on whether you are talking to an adult or talking to a teenager or child. So for teenagers and children, there is a difference, between educational use and use that is the interactive use. Boston Children's Hospital, that I got part of my training from, they call it problematic interactive media use. Okay, so the interactiveness of the social media or the interactiveness of the video game is more of a problem than the educational use. However, even the educational use, there can be too much. Just the screen itself, no matter what's on the screen, is damaging to, our brains, bodies, minds, and there are negative effects to us physically from too much screen use in various ways. And so while I say that, let's take social media, I think that, children and teenagers just don't need to have it. Okay. And that can be an extreme position. But when you look at all of the risks and all of the damage that can come, physically, mentally, relationally, academically, it is, very tough. And then for the parents to be in that battle, that is hard. But even just, screen use, you say, okay, well, we used to learn from books or talk to a person to ask, their advice or get information from a person. And so even the educational use of screens, I'm very wary of, because also that can be used as a babysitter instead of having face-to-face conversations with mom or dad or a grandparent.
I think you've kind of hit down to the for me, kind of the essence of it. And that is, it's really balance. I mean, I don't think we can really get away from e-learning. I mean, having worked in manufacturing and, we have to train 1,500 people on a software system. Going back, I love talking to people in front of people. I love that's my happy place. But the effectiveness of being able to do like a module that you can spread out to a large organization is going to be very difficult to rehinge. I think what you're saying, and this is the important part, is what are you using it for and how often? And I think that's the piece, especially with the chances of social media, the risk reward, and staying off of it as much as possible, because it's, like I said, the risks are very high with social media, not just from a bullying standpoint or from people piling on standpoint, but for just your own, addiction to dopamine hits on social media is the problem. Is that fair to say?
Right. Yes. I think that as adults, we are going to continue to use the internet, of course, and e-learning of various types. However, I will say this: many of the CEOs of the technology companies in Silicon Valley, they send their children to private schools that do not use screens. The children do not have their own personal devices at school, and the schools either have no computer use, no screen use, or they might have a little bit of it in the later high school grades. And so here we have the CEOs, the top people who are the smartest about the effects of screen use on children, do not let their children near screens. And to me, that's very telling, to say, here are these people who don't use their own product, right? And so I think we need to pay attention to that. That needs to become the new trend. There are now over 20 states who have passed a law so that children cannot bring their cell phones to school, or if they do bring it, they lock it in a pouch, and so they at least do not have their personal device at school, which I think is totally appropriate. But then also, I think we need to go away from children having iPads issued by the school. Well, they're taking those home and playing games on them and connecting. Even through learning platforms, they can connect to people and talk, and it's just a big mess.
Well, something that kind of comes to my mind too, as you were both talking, is that it's effective, but it's not the best effective way of communicating. It's quick,
Sure.
but it's also very passive. And I think there's something that happens in a conversation with a human, physically, or even when you're not interacting with a person. But I think of the research involved in writing in a journal, for example. The idea of taking an idea from your brain and making your physical hand write those ideas down activates a part of your brain that actually increases your self-actualization, your ability to feel like you are in control of your own life and destiny. And with a passive sense of learning, where you're just constantly feeding and responding back to a technology, that might be different. I mean, we're at the generation, or I'm at the generation where, we used to go outside and play, and there were times where we were bored. And when you were bored, we didn't have digital technology. Mm-hmm. So we created things. We put on plays. We did a haunted house. We built forts. We did stuff we weren't supposed to do, but we were doing it. You know what I'm saying? Like,
right.
we weren't sitting in a virtual room, literally and physically just doing nothing, but pretending and being fed like an entertainment passive world. And I see it because I didn't grow up that way, but if that's all you've known, there are people in the generation just underneath me, underneath the Gen X, the Gen Z and beyond, that the millennials and that they just, that's all they know. So they don't know the difference.
Right. That's a good point. These younger people don't know what they're missing. They don't know to ask for what they're missing, right? But I would love to speak to what you talked about with creativity and also with play. So with creativity, that's one of the things that employers are looking for, these emotional intelligence skills and executive functioning skills. And we can go more in depth to that we need, critical thinking skills to develop that part of our brains. But also with the play, many people do not realize that unstructured play, going outside, running around, playground, whatever it is, that helps your brain to be able to develop these skills of emotional intelligence and executive functioning. And people don't know that. Also, movement helps to develop your vestibular system, which is not only your sense of balance, but also your ability to control your arousal level. So we may have, young children today who appear to just be kind of going haywire, but it can be that their vestibular system was not developed properly because they've just been sitting passively in front of a screen, not moving. We don't realize that physical movement is helping our bodies and specifically our brains to finish developing. The human brain is not fully developed until age 26. So if you're listening out there and you're young, there's still hope for you. But
Does that mean there's no hope for me? I'm lost.
Yes, certainly. No.
Yeah, we'll get to the older people later, Chris. I don't know. I'm sure she has some tips for us.
Yes,
I hope
yes.
so.
So yes, there is definitely hope for older people. We will talk about that for sure. But for those who are younger, when your brain is not fully developed until age 26, that means that your environment, what you expose your brain to and what you don't expose your brain to, that matters. So if we are exposing our brains to a 2D world, not having conversations, not having movement, not going outside, things like that, you are changing the way your brain develops, literally. And that is what professionals like myself are trying to sound the alarm that, again, the way we grew up as Gen X and millennials, it's not just normal, it's actually critical for healthy human development.
So I'll share a story with you that kind of puts that home. I got to Mr. Mom, my daughter, when my wife's leave ended and I was a contractor. And so my contract ended. So I took about 3 months and I was Mr. Mom. Okay. And I didn't, I'm a guy. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I'm like, I've just got to feed him. I got to change him, change her. Like, that's all I have to do. And what I did is I took her, I would draw with her. Like, we'd take crayons and she'd have a crayon and she'd hold like this. And I had a pen and she'd say, meh, meh. Like before she could talk, she'd go, meh, meh. And I'm like, no, you can't have the pen unless you hold it like this. And I'm like, she's not going to hold like this until she's like 5. 3 weeks later, she's holding the crayon like this and she's drawing. And I spent, I'm like, oh, isn't that cool? So I gave her a pen because I promised, like, she's going to remember it too. And she's drawing. What I didn't do is I didn't take her outside. And I took her, she met we had a friend who was the same age, had a daughter the same age, and she had her daughter out running around the playground, and my daughter was walking like she was on the moon. She's like, So she had unbelievable fine motor skills, but I hadn't been developing the gross motor skills. And I went, oh, I need to do that. And I think this is kind of an example of what you're saying. So now if we look at what we were talking about with digital pieces, if you're only developing the eyesight from here to here and how to interact with the computer, that's going to be a problem for the other pieces. Let's say even your fine motor skills because you're not drawing, or your gross motor skills because you're not moving. And you're used to this, and you can get that immediate, gratification from a very, and especially the way things are designed to give people little wins along the way, that can become the way you're training your brain at a very young age. Would that be kind of a good way to encapsulate what you're saying?
Sure. Yes. We all need movement. No matter our age, we need to be moving around and not just be sedentary, but we also need time outdoors. We need to be comfortable, at a playground or taking a hike through the woods at a park or things like that. But again, that physical movement is very essential for development and then obviously maintenance of our bodies to be healthy. And so I think that, part of what I do is educating about child development and saying it's not just normal, it's critical for your child to be healthy, to not be stuck on a screen so much.
Well, we have so many workers around the world that, the great thing about the technology is you could work anywhere.
Right.
And, I know even myself, my way of working, I work out of my home and I have my computer. I'm not moving around an office like, I did when I was young. I'm not going up and down stairs. I'm not, walking across, a campus. I'm not, and they, you gain weight, you become less strong, And even like to go on vacation, sometimes, you're so tired or overweight that your vacations get shaped by that, even as adults. So instead of doing, going on vacation, doing something, you go on vacation and sit and eat and drink, right? You're still sedentary. You're just doing it in a new place, and I think it shapes like how not just how you work, but also how you relax and how you live your life. And I wonder if we're missing that intentionality or that kind of global look about our own presence.
I think so. I can, talk more about adults now. I know I've been talking about children and teenagers, but as adults, many of us use a computer for a lot of our workday or just, sitting down, like you said. And so we have to be intentional about getting up on a frequent basis to walk and get a drink of water or something like that, to move around as much as we can. And on our lunch breaks, stand up, move around, go somewhere. Also, for those of us who, have to be on a screen a lot for our work, and then at night we're on a screen to relax, quote unquote, that the blue light from the screen will block our body's production of melatonin, which can help us to fall asleep and also to stay asleep at night. And so it's best if we don't use screens at all at night. But if we have to for work, or if we have to for some reason, I highly recommend wearing the blue light blocking glasses. Those make a big difference. Like, really, you can tell the difference that they make in your body's ability to get relaxed and sleepy and to fall asleep at night if you wear those at night if you're going to be on a screen, because our sleep is obviously very essential for all of us, no matter what age, for sure.
Where would you buy those glasses? Is that like an Amazon Prime thing, or?
I will tell you yes, because that's where I bought them.
Oh, you have? See, it's funny. It's funny that you're talking about that, because I remember when personal computers came out in the late 70s, early 80s. I remember that people were worried about the green screen or the blue screen, and I thought it was funny because they would often either sell those glasses with it or make them available at all of the computer stores. But it disappeared pretty quickly, where people stopped using them pretty quickly, and you don't really hear about them too often.
I'm hoping that it's coming back into being popular again. But yes, you can buy them on Amazon for $30 or even $20. Don't be afraid to buy the cheap ones, because they should be still just as effective. So $20 or $30 for a pair, and use them at night if you have to be on a screen. But I say, especially for children and teenagers, but really all of us, screens do not belong in the bedroom. We just do not need them there, whether it's a phone, iPad, television for gaming. Our bedrooms and our beds are for sleeping. And so I just, I get so afraid when I have, talked to parents and their teenagers have a phone with internet access and all of this kind of stuff. Here's the comparison that I like to make. That, we would never let our child go spend the night at a stranger's house, right? That's just an automatic no. I don't know these people. You can't go over there. You can't spend the night. Sorry, right? But when you allow your teenager internet access, that is like having a virtual sleepover. And you have no idea who they're talking to, what kind of situation they're in, what kind of pressures they're feeling. And it's right up there in their bedroom. It's like the world in their bedroom. And that's very scary.
I want to share another story with you that kind of puts this home for me and what you're talking about. Is there's also something that said that the last hour of before you go to bed is what you want to hold sacred, and you want to focus on your stuff for the tomorrow. You don't want to let in things. And the way this hammered home for me is my wife and I had a television in our bed, and we got into watching a crime series. So I'm not going to call out the name. Okay. And it had 2 episodes at night before bed, and we would watch that and then go to sleep. And I started having nightmares about people breaking in and trying to, harm us.
Oh,
Let's just say that
no.
was the low end of what was going to happen.
Oh, no.
And I literally had to say to my wife, like, we cannot watch this program anymore.
Mhm.
It is giving me nightmares. So I think piggybacking on your ideas, you don't know what your kids are looking at.
Mhm.
And particularly, and I would say, and for me, with the algorithms that say, oh, this is what they like, that feed them more of that you don't have any control over,
Right.
right? Whether it's a game, whether it's, sex, whatever that is, violence, like those, they like that. That's still, they feed more of that to them. So I think it's a really important point for us to understand, having kind of guide rails around that. I mean, not just for our kids, but for ourselves. Like I said, I was a grown man, married, and having nightmares because of the things I was watching 2 hours worth and on a consistent basis. So it's almost like I was programming my brain every night to be thinking about these horrible, horrible things.
Right.
And to your point, what are you kids looking at? We'd like to think it's friendly stuff, but I don't know if that's really the case.
Hello, friends. Thanks for listening. A Squared Lamp Groups powers this podcast. Their memberships are tax-deductible donations that directly support their work developing people and organizations. But just for you, they're offering podcast listeners a special 40% off coupon code to join. Your benefits as a member include additional resources, perks, and access that you can use all year, including an additional 30 minutes of bonus podcast content for every episode. Simply use the code 4listeners at checkout. That's the number 4, all caps, listeners at checkout. They also are giving our listeners free gifts to use now. Go to their website, asquaredlamps.org/podcast, and download your free My Success Course of Action worksheet. There is no cost, registration, or sales pitch involved. Just click it and save. Use it to work on something significant to you this month, maybe even something that sparks interest from today's podcast. Then click to join our free but private Stop Digging Podcast LinkedIn group, where the conversation continues between you, the hosts, and our guests. Don't forget to subscribe and share this podcast with your friends. And now, back to the program.
Well, you bring up an interesting point, Chris, because, when we're using technology as adults or children, we think we're in control of the technology because we're the ones using it and we're choosing it. The problem, and what you mentioned, is that there are algorithms in technology now across every platform, everything, social media, websites, AI, everything. And what it does is it's intended to market what and put together what you individually want to see. So it learns from you and then feeds back over and over again what you want to see. And so, we've seen a lot of, bipolar interactions, not just in our country, but around the world, where people are only interacting with the people that believe the same things they do. And it's because everything is being curated so that only your political views, only your religious views, only the peccadillos that you like, whether it's porn or, education, it's feeding only the stuff that you in particular want to see. And so in real life, IRL, we don't get that option. You don't get to choose who you work with or live with or go to school with. And so, if those skills aren't there, then what happens is when we're encountering something or someone that's different, we immediately go to DEFCON 5 and this person is my enemy.
Right.
And that's not true. As a coach also, I talk about we're more than one thing, but that's hard to, if your whole world is, digitally curated, you don't have that control. And that I'm thinking that might feed some of the addiction because your technology becomes a safe place.
I think there's a lot of truth in what you said, that the real world is full of a lot of variety. And we need to be able to interact in that variety. That's a great point. And we know that these social media companies have come out and said, that they hired psychologists to teach them addictive properties that they then built into their systems, social media, gaming, things like that. So we know that they intentionally addicted us. It didn't just happen that they built it and, this happens to be addictive. That's not true. They did that on purpose. It's also important to remember that with these platforms, we are not the customers. We are actually the product, right?
We are the commodity. Absolutely.
Yes. So they get their money from the advertisers, and they are going to feed us whatever they think that we want more of because of the algorithms. But we are, again, the product that they are using. And that does not feel good. But I also wanted to mention something here in regards to younger people. Now there are a few different companies who are making phones that have a screen. So it looks like a regular smartphone, but it does not have the hard wiring necessary to be able to connect to the internet. So your child or teenager, if you want them to have a phone for safety purposes, to be able to call you when they're at the friend's house, or be able to have a phone when they're out, driving, that's great. But then to not be able to access the internet, to me, is pretty critical. And so those phones are being made now specifically for teenagers.
Unsmart phones.
Yes, unsmart phones. Some people call them dumb phones, whatever.
We won't call them dumb phones. We'll call them, they're
unsmart.
Whole life phones, whatever we want to do. We got better marketing than dumb phones.
Right? I feel like calling them wellness phones would be a good start in getting people on board.
We'll get a marketing team together, the three of us, and we'll come up with something a little more coachy, like I'm giving my kids the dumb phone, like that kind of thing.
Well, ironically, the first thing that I wanted to do is, like you, go into AI and ask it, what to call it, and you get the list. But that even that, I'm as bad as anybody else, and I don't adopt technologies quickly, but once I do, they become part of my life. I mean, I thought CDs when they came out in the 80s were going to be a fad. Why would anyone pay $16 for a CD when you have cassettes, but once they came out, I would have like 1,000 CDs, right? So, some people are like that, where you're not necessarily a techno person, but once it becomes part of your life, it's going to be there. And I guess let's find some balance here too, because I think about the Amish. Like, we don't want to be Amish. We still live in the real world, and technology exists. So how would you shape that?
I think this is a good point. So we only got we have probably a few minutes left. It was good idea to get into like some recommendations. So we've talked about the problems.
Yeah.
So now, since we have the expert here, and this will lead into our bonus content, but for those who aren't part of A Squared Lamps, let's get them, or the Stop Digging podcast. Let's get some concrete things that maybe you can talk. Let's first talk about kids, and then let's talk about me. I mean adults. Sorry, I'm trying to make it personal. But let's talk about kids first. So what would you be recommendations that would give for parents, and maybe you could break it down a little bit over, let's say younger kids to teenage, and then a little, kind of break it down maybe in 3 segments for very young kids, middle school and high school kind of thing.
Sure. Well, I'll go back to what Susan said as well. And we have to remember that the Amish people are living and in many ways are thriving. And so, especially when you think about the youngest kids, they just plain do not need a phone. They don't need an iPad. They don't need a phone. They don't need any of that in order to be wonderfully happy, like we have been for centuries, right? The Amish are showing us how we used to live and how we used to thrive. And so for the youngest of kids, they just plain do not need it. They don't need, and even this goes into television, even though television is passive rather than interactive. You want those little bodies to be moving around, to be talking, to be playing, to be exploring, to be creative. And so, I would say if you want your child to have a phone for safety purposes, maybe when they're like 8 or 10 years old, get them one of those phones that's not smart, shall we say, so that when they're at a friend's house or at grandma's house, they can call you and you can call them. But those phones also can restrict so that the calls are only from numbers that you approve, so that they're not getting calls from strangers or scammers, things like that. So that's great. And again, like I said before, social media, you just delay it as long as possible. It's difficult once a teenager has social media to take that back. But there's where I go into saying, okay, if you can find even one other family with teenagers of a similar age and say, we're going to do this together. We're going to ditch social media and we're going to get together face to face. We're going to just have real life like it used to be, that is so wonderful. And so, as long as you can delay it, the better. If your teenager does have social media, I would say don't just be their friend on there from your account. You need to have their passwords and be able to get inside their account as well, for sure. And be, just talking to them a lot about that. And so going into video games, I know we haven't talked about that much, but I just say for someone of any age, just zero video games. I don't see any benefit. I realize people enjoy it. And of course, people get addicted to it, but video games just need to go. There are no benefits from that. And there are many, many, many detriments to playing video games. So, and then educationally, even, I'm hoping that schools will be getting away from giving out iPads and having them on a screen at school, because they need that face to face. They need to be able to listen to a teacher. One of the things that social media does is it provides a lot of novelty in that scroll. And so then when a brain is used to novelty 6 or 7 hours a day, how can they sit and listen to a teacher who is now seen as boring because it's not as exciting, it's not as interactive? And so social media and specifically video games actually create ADHD symptoms within people. So we need to watch out for that. So I'm just full of cautions is what I would say.
Well, just to add on to what you just said too, part of why A² Lamp Groups, our strategy for learning, we're a learning organization, is we don't just put information out for people. We're trying to get people into groups. Because interactive learning among people, just through conversation, organically or otherwise, is a more powerful learning tool that solidifies things. And I think I don't specialize in children, but I'm assuming that would be the case for children as well as adults.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I have one for you, and this is the challenge, right? And I think you talk to it. So I'd like another strategy. One is to get together, let's say, with I'll use my son as an example. His son's friends, a lot of their interaction, if it's not on the basketball court or their sport, is they get on and they talk to one another. So like I used to play over a board game. They interact over a video game. Right. And I tell my son, like, if your friends aren't on, you shouldn't be on that. Mm-hmm. But that's how they interact. Like, that's how they all get together and joke around, like I used to when I was playing Risk. So, what are some other recommendations that you would have? Like, I know one that we use is we have an app that tracks how much time you're spending on your phone and what apps you're on. And then we figure we can hold you accountable. When you get to like, hey, I was on this game for 6 hours. You think that was really in your best interest to be doing that, or you're on YouTube or whatever it is for hours. So then at least we have the numbers and we can talk to our kids about it. So this age is very difficult to put that genie back in the bottle. So, that's the way I've navigated. I'm like, if your friends aren't on, you should not be playing a video game by yourself. That is really for you, because your friends are all over the place and nobody gets together. And that's the culture now too.
Right.
Well, I was just thinking while you were talking about people talking on the video games, my nephew met his wife doing that.
Wow.
And actually, because they were all playing this video game. She lived in Romania, I mean, actually, I gave him a really hard time. I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, but or her, because she's wonderful. I love her. But we were joking that he's probably flying over a 40-year-old man. He's probably married to a Romanian guy, and the big hairy guy showing up, and it's like, we love you anyway. But I mean, he met her playing video games, him, his brother, and several others, but this young woman from Romania, and they were gamers, and they both work in coding now, and she came over and they're married. But
Wow.
when you look at stuff like that and online dating, I mean, you hear these cases where it worked, but what you don't hear are all the cases where it doesn't work.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
and I wonder if that's also information that's getting curated, right? Because you want to rate the app, you want to those love stories that happen, or the, like what you were talking about, the connection of being able to, talk with your buddy who lives in a different state when his family moved, but now you can game and talk with each other. So it's a tough line to cross. And I know you're wanting to talk with us about some addiction stuff, strategies with adults, but I mean, it's just so much part of our lives everywhere.
Right.
It's hard to control.
It is very difficult to back up, whether it's yourself as an adult or whether it's your child or teenager. It is very difficult to back up. And that's where, you need support from others. You need another family or another individual to say, hey, let's do this together so you don't feel alone. And that really goes along with a lot of what AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, or even Celebrate Recovery, those two organizations have a lot of success in helping people work through addictions and stay sober. And so, one of those things is having peer support to say, we're doing this together. We're getting sober together. Another principle that's important in both of those organizations is having what they would call a sponsor, or in my case, it might be a mentor or a coach, to say, someone who is more educated in this who can help you, because so many people have tried and failed to set screen time limits in their home or to, change things for themselves. And that's because it's an addiction and it's hard. And so it's okay to say, hey, I need some help. I need some peer support, and I need a coach or a mentor to help me go through this process, because it is very difficult. Like you said, okay, yes, it'd be better for your son to play with friends on the video game rather than playing by himself. Sure. But can he, talk on the phone to his friends? Can he have things, times where he can get together? I know that, depending on the age, it takes a parent of one of the friends to drive, to get them together. But just to say, you have siblings, you have family here, you have a life at home, and then you go see your friends instead of interacting with them in this virtual world. But it has become a cultural norm, but that doesn't mean that it's good, right?
I'm not going to argue with you on that. I think like anything, maybe it's just you can limit it. Like, this is what the culture is, but when you're getting past, let's call it 2 hours or 1 hour or whatever you want to put as your limit on it, is that you have to manage that. So thank you. I kind of knew what you were going to say, and the difficulty, of course, is implementing it. And like anything, if you're going to break a habit, there's that period where you feel like crap because you have withdrawals, and it's going to be what would be the withdrawals? I guess from you is what would you experience from your withdrawal from like your addiction to this? Like what can you expect? I guess.
Well, you can expect, your body to be going through that, recalibrating to a normal level of dopamine. We all have dopamine, and we get healthy levels of dopamine rise from healthy things that are not addictive. But when we have that huge spike, whether it's from an illegal drug or whether it's from a video game or social media, it's too much. And so your body is going to be recalibrating to a healthy level of dopamine. So you're going to kind of feel low and down. Similar, it's not the same as drug withdrawals, but it has that similarity because it works on the same pathways in the brain as drug addiction does with the dopamine. And so not exactly the same, but very similar. And then, you're going to have to relearn to enjoy the things that you used to enjoy, or you're going to pick up new healthy habits, because when people have been on social media or gaming 6 or 8 hours a day, you have to take up that time with something else. You can't just sit there, or you shouldn't. And so you're going to have to take your time with something else. And so that, again, involves a lot of what I would call, the pre-planning, which is what I can help with as a coach. But just to say, okay, how do I get back to a normal, healthy life? What do I replace this with? I don't just take it away. I replace it with something that's healthy.
Well, you mentioned something too, and I'll run through the strategies you just shared to recap, but expecting a transition. We started off talking about, how nobody likes us when we're grumpy, but if you're withdrawing from, technology on whatever level, and trying to replace that with, in real life activities or people, there is going to be a transition where you might not be your attractive self.
Right.
People may not want.
Is that what you're saying? I might be grumpy.
Yeah, well, I mean, that would feed the idea that I'm not okay as I am because nobody wants to play with me. Nobody
It's
wants
so much
to
like
hang
drug
out with
addiction,
me.
isn't it? It's really kind of crazy to think about.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not feeling good and I want to feel good in the moment. So I go, instead of, going to heroin or whatever your drug of choice is, you're reaching for that thing that gives you that neurochemical that you produce that's as similar to heroin as you can get, right? I mean, so it's really kind of, it really is fascinating. I'm so glad you came on. It's got me. I don't know if you could tell. There might be steam coming off my head. That's not just a shiny light coming off my head, but it's really got me thinking about this, and particularly how challenging it is, especially with like remote work. You're one of the things that, just so you know, what I try to do to break up these things is I got on this kick of micro exercises. So that means getting up like every half hour or hour at the absolute most and doing like body squats or a push-up or a wall push-up or whatever it is to break I'm in this position grinding mode.
The hunchback,
And that's
the
one
laptop
strategy that
hunchback.
I've done. But I mean, Susan, I know we're getting towards the end here. I mean, look, I feel like we could have this podcast go on for like 3 hours. This would be like a Joe Rogan podcast where
I'm okay
just
with
keep
it.
talking.
Yeah, because I still have questions. We're going to talk about adults too, but one of the things you said. Well, actually, this might be a good transition into your strategies for adults because creating an in real life social group, like you were talking about with teenagers. Well, do you know how many adults I know who don't feel like they have friends? Because the only people, it's hard when you're not in school, the only friends that you have are at work, but work isn't, you don't want to be their best friend, right? Because you work with them. There's like a bit of a wall there, in your personal life versus your work life. And, I find that, adults and even up through like seniors, it's very lonely. And how do you create those social groups? I mean, I taught my mother-in-law at 84 how to text message because none of her friends could hear when they talked on the phone. And that opened her world up because they would text long conversations with each other and that connected them in a way, but working age, adults all the way up to, seniors, how do you make friends? How do you facilitate those, in real life social actions, and that, especially if you're coming out of a digital vortex or addiction, what does that look like?
Right. Well, that is, definitely a key is to have healthy in real life friendships. And I would say, for some people, it might be reconnecting to a faith community. For some people, it might be joining a hobby group. There are, ironically, or not that great, you can find hobby groups online, but then say, we got to get together in person to participate in our hobby together. But, I think that's, one advantage to being online is you can find groups of people who have your specific interests and then say, hey, I think we can, hang out. Obviously, you have to be extremely careful meeting strangers, but that's a way that you can find people that you interact well with and say, let's, get together, face to face and have coffee and things like that. But those friendships, again, we need real life in-person friends who can, rescue us when we have a flat tire on the side of the road, or who can, things like that virtual friends cannot do. And so, or to come, just to come sit with you and, be with you, and just that in-person company is so important for our human flourishing. And so I wouldn't call myself an expert in friendship development. I would just say I definitely promote the necessity of it. And it takes work, yes, but all of these things that take work, they're worth it. They're worth it for us to be healthy, happy humans. And so I want to prevent people from needing the extreme amount of help that they might need when people are so addicted. There actually are 2 or 3 places here in the US that are residential treatment centers for digital addiction. So just like we have,
I didn't know that.
There are. And actually, we are sort of behind. If you go to the Southeast Asia countries, they're just full of these, again, inpatient residential rehab centers for digital addiction. And so it can be that bad. But then, after you get out, it's just like when you have a drug addiction, you can't just go back to your same old life. You have to have those lifestyle changes, those sustained, I'm doing things differently now. I'm not, doing the things I used to do when I was an addict. And so having that peer support, a mentor or a coach can help that. And so I want to kind of get in the front end so that people don't have to go to these residential places. But that is a thing, unfortunately.
Gosh,
I'm
that's
sure.
that you just blew my mind, because and it just highlights this is a global issue. It's not just us or just American. I mean, people in Asia, Europe, places in Africa, anywhere where there's technology and it's driving the workforce, the education, the economy. There's that temptation for it to just take over your life and ambitions and outlook. I mean, this is amazing. I mean, I do you foresee that there might be like a cyber psychology digital addiction center in the United States anytime soon? I mean, do you see us doing that?
So are you talking about just for research and educational purposes, or are you talking about the residential treatment?
Like a residential program? Do you think?
Yes, there already are 2 or 3 here in the United States.
Okay.
And one of them, it started out as a 30-day program. Now it's a 90-day program where you go and live for 90 days to conquer your digital addiction. So
that's a great way for an adult to get through what we were talking about, expecting that transition period between, when you unplug from that addiction, you don't become this wonderful person everyone wants to hang around. And that can feed that negative.
True. Also, I mean, we have in our head that, I'll be done with this in a week. I won't do X, Y, or Z. But it's that ability to end up going back to things. And that timeline of that, I think of like AA when they talk about it, it's like, I asked them one time, it's like, when are you ever going to say you're not an addict? Like you've got it mastered. They're like, no, like you have to stay diligent on it. It might take you 90 days to get through the withdrawals, but after that, you have to be very careful. And particularly in this day and age, it's, so much is consumed through digital content. I mean, it's just, it's just kind of fascinating. It's fascinating.
Yeah. And I will say this, hopefully to encourage parents, because I know we've been talking about a lot of depressing and discouraging things here, that families do a digital detox. A lot of them will start seeing improvements in, their child's mood and behavior pretty quickly. So while it is an actual addiction, and it is going to be difficult at first, and it's going to be hard work, you can start to see positive things happen fairly quickly, which again, that's going to reinforce you to say, this is the right thing. Let's keep going. And so I want to instill hope in people. I don't want to just be this, oh, this is terrible, horrible. I want to say, we can do this. We can improve our lives, whether it's as an individual adult or as a family with children. We can do this.
I love that.
And
This is a great
that.
place for us to end. Yeah. Yes. Because I do think, gosh, we don't ever just want to focus on the problem. We do want to focus on solutions. So we're going to end the show here by or at least our 60-minute show for the public. And I'm going to go through the strategies that you kind of talked about. And then what we're going to do is, for all of our members, if you're an A² member, you're a donor to our nonprofit and you're supporting the work that we do. And there's other benefits that you get. One of the benefits is that you get our 90-minute podcast, which includes bonus content from our amazing guests like Mary Catherine here. And so if you're a member of A², hang on, we'll get that bonus content. If you're not, just go to our website, a2lamps.org, and join at any level. And we'd love to have you. There's lots of benefits loaded there. So let me run through the strategies you said. Correct me, Mary Catherine, if I say something wrong or miss something. But first strategy, when you're using technology, don't use it in the bedroom, and use blue light blocking glasses so that your sleep isn't disrupted. And getting enough sleep helps you make better decisions anyway. Whether you decide to detox or not, you got to have the brain intact, right, to make that decision. And given that, and assuming you're making right decisions, first thing, be aware of how much time you're spending on technology and what technologies, and then manage it. Once you're aware, you're responsible for that. And so manage that. And so that's one of the things that you and Chris were both talking about a lot, is that once you know, you have to actively manage it. And if you're not actively managing it, you're passively accepting it. Right.
You're the commodity, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. And
somebody else's control of life.
Right. And the third thing is create an in real life social group. Facilitate it. If they're little kids, it's play dates where they're active and not on technology. If it's a teenager, it's, non-technology, talking on the phone or getting together with another family and creating that social group where you interact and barbecue and go hiking and do stuff. If you're an adult, join something. Now, I'm not necessarily a joiner in my natural personhood, but there's got to be something you like. If it's a book club, join a book club. Go to church, or wherever you worship, or, what was the other thing you talked about? Hobby group.
Any hobby specific interest.
And sign up for a class, meet all your classmates, right? At a senior center or at a university, in real life, show up.
Yes.
It's a hassle. You have to get in your car, you have to drive, you have to talk with people, but it gets easier. So it's going to start off feeling very awful.
Something that we over and talking to your friends.
Right, exactly. Somebody knocking on your door, falling.
It's crazy.
Exactly. It's gonna feel awful at first, but that's the next thing is, you may need a mentor or a coach to give you some perspective, so you don't accept all the negative or positive feedback as being the only feedback. So a mentor or a
that's
coach.
Where Mary Catherine could come in and help you, right?
Right. And having a mentor or a coach or even a psychologist to communicate with can also maybe help your marriage, because if your spouse is the one who's digitally addicted, that's a whole nother can of worms we didn't even talk about. But mentor or coach. And then the next thing is expect a transition. While you can't just withdraw cold turkey. You have to replace it with something. And during that transition, there needs to be reality, and there's also practicing kindness during any transition. And then also, Mary Catherine, you talked about some digital addiction residence centers. And I would love it if you could either drop those in our Stop Digging podcast group, and if you're not on there, listeners, please just check in. You never know when a nugget like this is going to drop in. You may know somebody that may need this. And like any addiction, getting people the help that they need, or at least knowing what the resources are, can plant that seed. So thank you so much for being here on the show. Chris, I love your stories always. And the video, you're so animated. And also, if you're just listening, listeners, we're working on getting some videos out there on our shows, and you'll love him too. So Mary Catherine, we love it, and stick around and share some more strategies.
Thank you so much. This has been great.
Hi, this is Chris, podcast team coordinator for A² Lamp Groups. Thank you for listening and subscribing to the Stop Digging Community Podcast. Keep the conversation going. Search for the Stop Digging group on LinkedIn, and don't miss out on our next episode.